Hey guys, welcome back to Games of War. Today's episode is one that I've wanted to do ever since I started a channel back in 2011. I never did shoot a Sega CD Collection video with the first Games of War channel, so I'm going to rectify that situation by sharing my collection in this episode for you guys. Now the Sega CD, for those that know me, know the channel, is probably tied for my favorite console of all time. It may sound like a strange choice to a lot of you, but this is the system that I got growing up. I was a big Sega guy, big Genesis fan, and I was really hyped up for the CD attachment. I was reading about it in all the magazines, going over the launch titles. I just could not wait to play games on a CD. I was all about the system, and it made it really hard in school because nobody else had one of these things. I was always going off to my friends about it and ranting and raving, and they just didn't get it because nobody else had one. And most people just saw the full motion video games. They were cool at first. They were the big new thing. After people played those games and saw the very limited and shallow gameplay, most people wrote the system off. I stuck with it throughout the entire life cycle of the system, and I absolutely adore it to this day. It was a great system back then, misunderstood. Criminal how Sega handled this system. They did not put any effort into developing new titles for the system, new IPs, and sticking to gameplay that worked. They were experimenting with every single thing other than making solid, great 2D games, which, with a few exceptions, they did make some good games for it. But in terms of groundbreaking new IPs for the system and making this thing like a supercharged Genesis with like beautiful 2D graphics and excellent, every game had excellent music, I'm not going to lie. Sega CD soundtracks are one of a kind. But it's just sad to see how the Sega CD was mishandled by Sega themselves. Towards the system's end in like 95, 96, they were pumping out AAA stuff for the Genesis like Comic Zone and Rise Star, Vector Man. What were they doing with the Sega CD at that point? Absolutely nothing. So it's Sega's fault what happened to the Sega CD. So in terms of what I own here, this is the Model 1 Sega CD, Model 1 Genesis attached. This is my favorite overall. I love the look. I love the bigger Sega CD sitting underneath it. I'm a big fan of the Model 1 Genesis, so I actually like the music better in this too, like the boot up music, the start screen. This is my favorite unit by far. This is the Model 2 Genesis and Model 2 Sega CD with the 32X. I do like this system as well. It seemed to perform better in the long run in terms of lasting and reliability. I heard a lot of people's Model 1s breaking down on them. But I own both of these systems boxed, mint and complete. Very happy to own these. And also do own another variation of the system, which is my personal favorite, and that is a Sega CDX. This is just, for me, the perfect system. It combines two of my favorite consoles of all time into one sleek little portable unit here. You could actually take this on the go back in the early 90s and use it as like a Walkman, Discman. That was cool back then, not so much today. But I love this system. It eliminates a couple power bricks, just one power brick for this thing. And I love this system to death. So these are the consoles that I have. Let's go ahead and take a look at the games. The launch titles for Sega CD and early releases came in cardboard boxes, as opposed to what most of you probably remember, the oversized giant jewel plastic cases that Sega CD, Saturn, and early PlayStation 1 games came in. So these first batch of games here are the system's early releases. In no particular order, this is Road Avenger. And if you notice, all my games, I went to videogameboxprotectors.com. They sell these fantastic plastic protective casings for your games. Great for cardboard games. This is Road Avenger. This is one of my favorite games in the Dragon's Lair style gameplay, where you have animation running on screen and you have to react by pushing left, right to steer the car at certain times. You also have to hit brake and turbo. Just like Dragon's Lair, you have to hit it pretty fast. You are a couple seconds too late, you'll see a death animation. Really gripping story in this one in terms of an opening, very powerful. Your girlfriend is killed by a renegade biker gang, and this is basically all about you taking revenge and running all these sons of bitches off the road. Great animation, good music. I love Road Avenger. Another game very much like Dragon's Lair, Road Avenger, this is Time Gal. This is a very anime-based game, anime look. The characters, Time Gal. Not quite as good as Road Avenger. She visits different time periods, and you watch the animation unfolding on screen, and you have to react quickly. A really short game. This is once again by Renovation. They did a lot of these full motion animation games. Good stuff, just not as good as Road Avenger. Next we have Jaguar XJ220. Now the guys that did this game, Core, they worked some real magic on this Sega CD, really took advantage of the system, pushed the hardware. This is a really cool racing game. You can only use a Jaguar XJ220, but you can design your own tracks. It's got great music and some really good racing controls, really smooth scaling on this game, good sense of speed. This is a fun racer. Next is an old PC game port, Willy Beamish. This is an early point-and-click game. Really slow load times in this one. Thankfully, they have like a little interactive screen that you can mess around. Excuse me when I say this, it's going to sound really funny, but they're balls. You play with balls while you wait for the game to load. You can make them go all different crazy directions. It's kind of, you know, it works. It's kind of amusing to cure for the wait, the load times, but like a Saturday morning cartoon come to life. Pretty hilarious dialogue and voice acting, but I really enjoyed this one. It's good stuff. This is Hook on the Sega CD. This game came out for all the 16-bit games platforms back in the day. It was a big movie. This version is basically identical to the Genesis version. What it does have is beautiful music, ripped straight from the movie. Fantastic soundtrack. It's got some cutscenes from the movie as well that weren't in the 16-bit games. If you like Hook, it's a pretty good game. It's a good platformer, so I like the Sega CD version. One of my favorites on the system, this is an arcade perfect port of Final Fight, minus a few colors and I think a few enemies, but it has two-player support, which the Super Nintendo version lacked at the time. This has got all three characters, which the Super Nintendo version lacked Guy. So this is as close to arcade perfect as you're going to get, barring the 360 arcade versions. Just a great game, and this has made me proud to own a Sega CD back in the day, and I could put this one in my friend's face and say, hey listen, we've got an arcade perfect version of Final Fight. Excellent game on the Sega CD. Next up is Chuck Rock, another 16-bit platformer that came out on all the systems at the time. This one's got some different music and some animated cutscenes. Other than that, it's the same 2D platformer from all the other systems. If you're noticing a pattern here, the Sega CD did get a lot of ports that were basically Genesis games with cinemas and music, and that didn't help the Sega CD in the public's eye. Why spend $300 on the system for the same graphics? Everybody wanted to see new graphics in the Sega CD. It was supposed to be twice as powerful, 3 times as powerful as Super Nintendo and Genesis, and here we are getting same 16-bit games, so that was a real problem. Chuck Rock is an okay platformer, it's pretty fun. Once again, Prince of Persia, same as the other systems, I believe, with some new music and a new opening cinema. This is one of those games that tried the new animation style where it's pretty, I don't know, it's a fun game, but you have to be patient with the animation. I tried something new, games like Out of This World, Flashback, all these kinds of new animations and gameplay systems, but a fun game. Afterburner 3, this was somewhat of a disappointment. I believe this was just G-Lock. I believe it was a port of that. It wasn't really a brand new Afterburner game. Not nearly as good as Afterburner 2. Some good music. Graphics were not very impressive for the system, so I was kind of disappointed with this, although it's still fun to play. Wolfchild. I think this was on Super Nintendo as well. The Sega CD version has better music, obviously, and some cinemas. Very much like more of the games I've talked about, just straight ports to the Sega CD with cinemas and music. This is a fun game, but once again, not really justifiable owning a brand new system for, but I enjoyed it. Wonder Dog. This is a 2D platformer, hand-drawn. Tons of enemies in this game. You've got over 400 different enemy types, so you're never going to see the same enemies recycled over and over again. Is it a good game? It's pretty good. I like it a lot. I liked it a lot back in the day when it first came out. I think this was on the Amiga as well, but at the time I didn't know that. This was a breath of fresh air on the Sega CD with some kind of Saturday morning opening cartoon and very colorful graphics, good looking game for the time, and some great music. This is Black Hole Assault, an original game on the Sega CD and a launch title at that. And I stress the word original because this is actually a sequel to Heavy Nova on the Genesis, which was a it was a mech platformer with one-on-one sections, and this game kind of got rid of the platforming and all that and just focused on being a one-on-one fighter. The fighting system is awful in this game, very limited special moves, not very cool fighters to choose from. You've got 2, but once you beat the enemies and bosses, it's just strictly one-on-one fights, then you can use the enemies as you unlock them. But one thing this did have is some amazing, cheesy cinemas. It told a pretty cool story. Every 2 or 3 guys you beat, you see a new story sequence. Lots of animation and cheesy voice acting. This is the stuff that I love on the Sega CD, these hilariously voiced and these cheesily animated and acted scenes. Great stuff on the Sega CD, even if the fighting game is a bit bad. This is Batman Returns, once again a port of the Genesis game, but what saved this in my eyes and a lot of gamers' eyes at the time were the driving sequences. And these driving sequences showed the scaling and rotation power of the Sega CD. It put the Super Nintendo to shame in terms of overall smoothness of the scaling and speed. Very impressive for the time. The Batmobile sections looked great. The Batwing, I believe it was, under the sewers of Gotham racing in this Batwing was pretty badass too. Great driving sequences. Unfortunately, it was packaged with the mediocre Genesis game platformer, so a mixed bag. Thankfully, you can turn the platforming off and just play the driving game if you want, which is a plus. Cobra Command. This is another launch game for the Sega CD in the style of Road Avenger and Dragon's Lair. This one, it's a port of an old arcade game, much like Road Avenger. But this one you could shoot and steer, so you are going to be watching for turning left, right, pull up, you know, and also shooting. So it was pretty fun. At the time when it launched, I had played nothing like this before, so it was very impressive for the time. Now it's somewhat dated, but still a fun game. And finally, we have Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective Volume 2. You know, these are early PC ports, CD-ROM games where you point and click away on old London and try to solve murders and cases as Sherlock Holmes. If you like the early stuff like this, not much gameplay involved, just pointing and clicking, then you'll like this. But other than that, they're pretty average, mediocre at best. At the time, very impressive though. I should also mention that with the pack-in games for the Model 1 Sega CD, we had Sherlock Holmes and then Sega Classics. This was like a 5-in-1. Columns, Golden Axe, Revenge of Shinobi, and Streets of Rage, and this was Soul Feast. This is an excellent 2D shooter. I believe it's like a sequel to Soul Feast in the Genesis, but great music in this one and a lot of fun. Great gameplay. This is a great 2D shooter. And the Sega CDX or Model 2 also came with Sonic CD, Echo the Dolphin, and another 5-in-1 pack here. Next up is Sonic CD, quite possibly, most definitely, my favorite Sonic game ever made. I love the music in this, the levels, the time traveling mechanic, going back in time to the past and there's future, present. Just an excellent mechanic that works very well. Once again, the bonus stages in this showed off the Mode 7 scaling and rotation abilities that similar to the Super Nintendo, but the Sega CD was more powerful, so it could do these effects much better, and it showed in these bonus rounds. Very smooth. This is my favorite Sonic game. Classic, great music. I love this one. My favorite fighting game from the 16-bit generation. This is how Sega CD should have been used. This is a great sequel. Ups the frames of animation, tons of new characters, new moves, Cinekills. This game has got some of the most violent finishing moves and overkills. Great cast of characters. They really improved this from the Genesis version. Sadly, it came very late in the system's life and nobody really cared. But this is a great original 2D fighter developed strictly for the Genesis and Sega CD. It wasn't in the arcade. This is a great fighting game and one of my favorites on the system. These are the Echo the Dolphin games. These are straight ports of the Genesis, but they get a pass from me personally because the soundtracks are so amazing, done by Spencer Nielsen. They are the most atmospheric and mood-enhancing soundtracks I've ever heard. They sported Q sound, so back in the day if you had a surround sound system or any system that had two speakers, you were going to get some awesome sound effects. And the cool thing about Sega CD games are, if you pop these in the computer, you can rip the soundtracks right to your hard drive and have them on your iPod or wherever you listen to your music. So Genesis ports, but beautiful music, so they get a pass from me because it's that damn good of a soundtrack for both games. Good stuff. Nothing like the Echo the Dolphin games either, to this day. Next up we have Sylpheed, and this was a very important game for the Sega CD. This showed that the system had power. It was doing things that no other system could do, including Neo Geo. The 3DO wasn't out yet, I don't think. But this used polygons, very early polygons, but they were kind of cheated because it was like pre-rendered stuff running full motion. It looked very good, very convincing for the time. I'd never seen anything like it. This made me proud to own a Sega CD. Unfortunately, it was a little too late in the system's life. By that point, the combination of full motion video games mixed with Genesis ports with enhanced music only spelled the death note for the system. Once that first impression was made, people just didn't give it a chance, unfortunately. Now here we have some really good stuff for the system. Lords of Thunder, which was a port of a Turbo Duo game. Now I've read some reports that the Sega CD version is better, and I've read reports that the Turbo Duo version is better. I don't know, I never played the Turbo version, so the Sega CD impresses the hell out of me. Fantastic hard rock soundtrack, just some great power metal in there. Great graphics, excellent power-up system. Robo-Molest is a sequel to Musha, one of my favorite shooters in the system. Beautiful graphics, excellent music, some great cinemas. And then Android Assault is a great 2D shoot 'em up with, once again, beautiful music. Really cool power-ups. You can transform into like a robot. These are great shooters in the system. This is the kind of games that the Sega CD needed at the time. Original, fresh games for the system, you know, the port withstanding. But this was fantastic stuff on the system, and this would have changed a lot of people's opinion if they actually cared and took a little bit of a deeper look into the system. Great stuff. Another couple of great shooters. This is Soulstar. This is by Core. This was really pushing the system as well. Some great graphics. Core really knew how to get the most of the Sega CD. Phenomenal scaling and rotation in this game. Really good looking game. Kind of confusing to play. There's a couple different modes where you're hovering above the ground and the screen's rotating around. But some pretty solid shooting action. I enjoy this game. And then Koei Flying Squadron is just an anomaly. This game has gotten so expensive. It's just out. It's out of control how much. I think it's $600 I've seen it going for all day long on eBay. Who would have known at the time? I saw this on the shelf many times. Hindsight, you know. But this is a really quirky, cutesy, animated 2D shoot 'em up. You play as like a little dragon riding, bunny-eared guy or girl, I don't know. But it's got some really cute animated cutscenes, and the shooting action is bright, colorful, fast. Lots of cool power-ups. I really enjoyed this game. It's quirky as hell, and it's a nice original game for the Sega CD. Here we have another couple games in the Chuck Rock series of games. This is Chuck Rock 2, the sequel to Chuck Rock. You can play as Chuck's son in here. There's some more animated scenes. Very bright, colorful platformer. I like it maybe a little bit better than the first one. Maybe not. I don't know. They're okay games. They're pretty standard platformers. If you like 2D platformers, they're dirt cheap. Give them a chance. By Core, once again, this is BC Racers. Take the characters from Chuck Rock and turn it into like a Mario Kart-ish type kart racer. And you have a pretty impressive game on the Sega CD. Great use of the scaling and rotation. Pretty impressive for the time. And a fun game. Good gameplay. Revengers of Vengeance. I've done a review on this one, I think, a while back. A pretty strange game. A mashup of a fighting game, some shmup elements, and a role-playing game, all mixed in together to form one game. The battles are like one-on-one fighter. It's not the best fighting engine around, but it's serviceable. It's fun. The RPG elements, you're in a town, you're learning, gaining experience, you know, talking to people. But it's basically RPG mixed with a fighter with some shmup elements. Really cool. It didn't get good reviews, but I enjoyed the hell out of this game. The Terminator. Now this is a breath of fresh air in the system. Not a port of the Genesis game or any other system. A brand new experience for the system. Great graphics. Great shooting action. Some digitalized full motion video from the movie, which I could care less about. But another kick-ass soundtrack by Tommy Tallarico. Great stuff on the Sega CD. A great action game. The system could have definitely used more original great games like this. Wild Woody. As you can probably tell by the name, one of the worst platformers I've played. This game is pretty awful music, really bad game overall. I wouldn't recommend this to anyone. It's an original game on the Sega CD, so I've got to give it props for that. But beyond that, if rubbing your ass against the wall and rubbing your ass on enemies to take them out sounds fun to you, maybe give it a try, but I didn't enjoy it. 3 of my favorite games on the console. Rise of the Dragon, The Space Adventure, Cobra, and Snatcher. Snatcher needs no introduction. I'm sure you're all well aware of this game. This is kind of like the crowning jewel of the Sega CD collection. Ahead of its time, this game is like Blade Runner meets futuristic Terminator, graphic novel, point and click, perfection. Kojima did the story. This game is worthy of all the praise that it gets. It's one of a kind. I love the game to this day, still play it all the time, at least once, twice a year. Space Adventure is another point and click, not quite as good as Snatcher, but it's really enjoyable. There's some really risque stuff in this. There's like nudity and lots of point and click action, branching storylines, lots of animation going on. Really cool story in this one. I do like Space Adventure quite a bit, and it's starting to get pretty up there in price as well. Rise of the Dragon is I believe a PC game. You play as Blade in a futuristic city. I really had fun with this one. It's got a real futuristic science fiction atmosphere. Really cool animation and story. Really realistic and gritty, and very well written. Very good voice acting for the time. Really hard to figure out certain spots of the game, but if you get stuck, you can always check online these days. Back then when I was a kid, I didn't have that option, so I really got stuck in a few spots here that were just really difficult, but overall a really fun game and very high quality stuff. These are 3 must-own games in the system in my opinion. These games need no introduction. I don't want to beat a dead horse. I have talked about these games till I'm blue in the face. Working designs, Lunar, Lunar 2, my favorite RPGs of all time, bar none. Excellent games. What got me into RPGs, made the system totally worth owning. Oh, they're over here, sorry. My favorite games of all time, beautiful RPGs, tons of remakes of the first one, just great stuff. Popful Mail is excellent side-scrolling action RPG, tough as nails but a great story. Vi is another RPG like Lunar, Lunar 2. Not quite as good as those in my opinion, but still a great RPG. This is the pinnacle of role-playing games back in the early 90s, if you ask me, and they were only on the Sega CD, so that was a huge plus for the system. Here we have another couple RPGs in the system. Shining Force, which is a collection of Game Gear games. Shining Force is up there with my favorite strategy RPGs of all time. This is a great entry on the Sega CD. However, if you want to play this game to the fullest and actually be able to play it at all and save, you're going to have one of these. This is the Sega CD backup RAM cart. You plug it into the cartridge slot and it gives you a ton more memory to save your games. This is a must-own if you want to play Shining Force, and they're great to have just for storage purposes. The Sega CD did not have a lot of built-in internal memory, so this is a great thing to have. Dark Wizard is a very underrated strategy RPG. You can name all your characters. It's got fantastic music. There's, I think, 6 different characters to choose from. 6? Maybe 8, I don't know. But they're all fresh, unique characters. Lots of backstory, excellent openings, animated, fully voiced. You can name all your characters and recruit different classes, and they go up in levels, and you can move against these maps, and that's like hexagons, you move them out, kind of like Shining Force, but a little different. Top-notch, underrated strategy RPG for sure. Dark Wizard is a gem, and it's not too expensive, so if you like RPGs and you have the Sega CD, definitely get Dark Wizard, it's great. Heimdall is a unique action RPG puzzle solving game. I believe it came out on the computer first, or the Amiga. It's got a first-person battle system, and there's a lot of obscure puzzles in this, and I liked it quite a bit. I like the Norse mythology, but some of the gameplay was kind of confusing for the time, and it was a good game. You just had to be prepared to put some time into it to get the rewards out of it. But a good game for the Sega CD at the time. A great platformer on the Sega CD, very good looking. I think this came out on the Amiga first as well. Flink, Your Young Magician, very solid 2D platforming, excellent graphics and graphical style. Mixing potions is a lot of fun. Just great 2D solid gameplay with excellent music and great graphics. This was a good game on the Sega CD. It could have used more like this for sure. I really enjoyed this one. Bram Stoker's Dracula was interesting because this tried something new on the system. There were pre-rendered graphics that scrolled. It was a strange look, and it made for the digitized characters looking pretty awkward against these backgrounds that were kind of grainy, but it was an impressive looking game for the time, and it had some of the movie cutscenes thrown in there. The gameplay, sadly, was pretty awful, so however impressive it looked was totally negated by the awful gameplay, which had you kicking and punching bats and rats, and the jumping controls were awful, so all in all, disappointment, unfortunately. Mansion of Hidden Souls. I quite enjoyed this game. This is a first-person adventure kind of puzzle-solving game, similar to like Myst. You are kidnapped, or your sister is kidnapped, or she wanders off into a mansion and is disappeared and turned into a butterfly. These butterflies are holding her. You don't know whether she is a butterfly or she's been kidnapped by them. So it's a pretty interesting mystery, and it's really atmospheric, and it's got some really cool music. I really enjoyed Mansion of Hidden Souls when I played it back in the day, and it holds up fairly well to this day. It's still got a lot of quirk and charm and really good music once again. So it's a pretty interesting game on the system, to be honest. Cliffhanger, big movie at the time. Once again, a port of a 16-bit game. I think it was on Super Nintendo and Genesis. This one has some pretty cool snowboarding sequences put in there. Really impressive, once again, with the scaling and rotation. Other than that, it's a straight port of the game. It's a beat 'em up, and it's got clips from the movie, which is, you know, per status quo for the Sega CD at the time. But at least they added some cool snowboarding sections in there, so that at least it was something extra, even though the game wasn't very good to begin with. Microcosm and Stellar Fire were both pretty impressive for the time. Microcosm actually used like computer-generated backgrounds, and it scrolled along with 2D sprites as the ship, and you were shooting things. And the backgrounds for the time were once again very impressive. It was just the gameplay and the kind of out of place look of the sprites over the generated backgrounds that were kind of like full motion video in nature. It's an interesting game, and it plays fairly well. And Stellar Fire was another game that was very impressive for the time. Great music of both of these. The shooting action in Stellar Fire is not quite as enjoyable as Microcosm, and you're in like a battle tank, and it's kind of hard to control where you're going and what you're doing. You just follow this cursor, and it's very realistic for the time and impressive, but the gameplay was just a little bit lacking. So can you tell me what all these have in common? Ding ding ding, that's right, they are all full motion video games. So these were the crutch of the Sega CD. They were pushing these games really big in the early days, and they were expensive to make, and the gameplay did not hold up. Once the wow factor wore off, these games were basically just memorization. You might be saying, why don't you have Night Trap, man? That's like the classic. And Night Trap was a launch game. I got it when it first came out, and I loved it on the Sega CD, like everybody else did at the time, until the gameplay set in. But there's a much better version of Night Trap on the 3DO, and that's where I own that one, and Supreme Warrior, and a few others. But yeah, I'm a collector, yes, but I don't need multiple versions of the same game. If there's a better version of the game, I'll have it on that system. So that's where Night Trap is. Ground Zero Texas was a really cool and expensive shooter that involved aliens taking over a small Texas town. Cheesy as hell, but I really enjoyed it. Lodestar is impossible to play. Lots of production value and some actors that I noticed from other places, but impossible to play, kind of like Sewer Shark, which Sewer Shark I also have on the 3DO if you're wondering. Masked Rider came in Riders O. This is actually a really good full motion video game. It has branching paths, and it's very Japanese and cheesy voice acting, but it's actually pretty enjoyable with the branching off, being able to do different things. At least you're trying something new in subsequent playthroughs. Wirehead was probably the most ambitious at the time. There was alternate paths through this one as well, and it was like full screen. It didn't help the grainy problem because the Sega CD could only display 64 colors on screen at one time, so all the video was grainy. But Wirehead pushed it pretty good. Tomcat Alley and Surgical Strike were shooters. Tomcat Alley came first. It's a pretty enjoyable playing game, actually. There's a lot of production value into this one too. It was the same thing over and over again, but it was fairly enjoyable. Surgical Strike was the sequel to Tomcat Alley. Did not fare quite as well. And then we've got Dracula Unleashed, and maybe Midnight Raiders was the sequel to Tomcat Alley. I'm not sure which way it was, but Midnight Raiders and Surgical Strike, as bad as a full motion video game can be, these were pretty awful. Not even close to the fun of Tomcat Alley. Dracula Unleashed was a lot like the Sherlock Holmes games, where you're solving a murder, you're going around trying to avoid Dracula and werewolves, and the acting makes an attempt. They try to, going around London. The characters are fairly interesting, but it's one of those things you have to be at the right place at the right time with obscure items, and if you're not, it's game over. It's hard to play the games. It's just over and over, playing it to memorize, playing to memorize. So all these full motion video games share something in common, which is it takes a certain gamer to appreciate them. I do like full motion video games to a certain extent. I hate what they did to the system, but they have their place in history. They were born on the Sega CD. They came a little bit earlier on the computers, but they gained the mainstream attention on the system, and they ultimately did more harm than good. Finally, we have Slam City, Scottie Pippen, and Fahrenheit. These were Sega CD 32X games, so you had to have 32X to play these games. And the reason that I have like Night Trap, Sewer Shark, Supreme Warrior, and Corpse Killer on the 3DO, they look better. Slam City with Scottie Pippen didn't come out on anything else, so it's either have it on the Sega CD or don't have it at all. Just awful game. Not any semblance of a basketball game whatsoever. It's, once again, you have to shoot at the right time or you're just gonna fail. Fahrenheit, I've never really enjoyed because I don't know how to. You have to go to certain rooms at a certain time. It's very confusing. I mean, obviously a lot of production was put into this, but I never knew how to play it, so I can't comment much on it. It's nonsense. So I hope you guys enjoyed taking a look at my Sega CD collection. The Sega CD is one of my favorites. It's a system I grew up with. It's up there with the Saturn as my favorite system of all time. And it's just really sad how the system just was mismanaged. The system was too early, the technology wasn't quite there yet, and everybody's rushed to find out what to do with this new CD technology. They missed the idea, which is just keep making good games. You know, don't try to do something that's not... Full motion video games and the Dragon's Lair style games killed the system with the combination of Genesis ports with music and cinemas. It just killed the system. The RPGs got it right because the system was doing things that no other system could do with the animated cutscenes and fully voiced dialogue to help push the story along. That was brilliant stuff. Snatcher is another great example. But Sega themselves, never any passion into the system. We got Sonic CD, which was great, and we got Eternal Champions, but other than that, they never really developed any new IPs, any new characters, pushed the system in any way. We never got any monster, beefy 2D games with awesome animation and great storylines, and you know, use that voice acting, use that animation for cutscenes to help push a story along, but give us rock solid 2D gameplay. They were making Comic Zone, they were making Rise Star, Vector Man in '95. They were pushing the Genesis hard, pushing the system to its limits. Sega CD sat there with nothing. Mismanagement from Sega and a bad impression just overcame the system. It didn't have a chance. It's sad. Thank you for watching. Games of War is nothing without you.